Now, even though just because an ETF has a massive amount of AUM or assets under management, or just a ton of cash stuffed inside of it, doesn't mean necessarily that it's the perfect ETF for you, or that it's going to meet your specific goals as an investor, but it does mean that a lot of people, institutions, and retail investors probably alike, at least see something in these ETFs, or they want to be the biggest across the entire world. So in this video, what we're going to do is I'm going to share with you the 10 largest ETFs by AUM or assets under management. We're going to go through all 10 of these ETFs and talk about what they have to offer, what some of their strategies are, and more or less just give you as a relatively newer investor an idea of where the big money is flowing. So if you would consider yourself a long-term investor, I definitely think it's important to know some of the biggest ETFs in the world. So stick around, drop a like down below, and let's get right into it. My A to Z dividend investing ebook has helped countless dividend investors get started with their journey. And my custom dividend tracker that I'm constantly using here on the channel has also helped so many investors stay on track and allow them to see their dividend income in real time. Well, today I have another treat for you guys. I'm not only going to offer you my A to Z dividend investing ebook and the custom dividend tracker, but also just for a short limited time, I'm going to be adding in my brand new weekly dividend blueprint ebook to show you how you can get started with weekly dividend ETFs and add this into your investing strategy. This offer is not going to last long, so go ahead and click the first link down below in my description, and you're going to get both ebooks and the custom dividend tracker bundle. But like I said, please act fast because this won't be around for long. Now let's get back into the video. So number one, the largest ETF that has 1.84 trillion with a T assets under management is an ETF that I always point new investors to, and this is because this is one of the largest ETFs in the entire world and offers diversification in, well, almost everything. The ETF we're talking about is VTI, or the Vanguard Total Stock Market Index Fund ETF, and just like it says, this ETF offers exposure to the total stock market. Now, long term, this ETF has grown pretty consistently, and although there have been better and worse performing funds over time, this ETF does offer you massive diversification with over 3,600 individual stocks inside the portfolio. Now, again, because I'm a long-term investor and I personally do know a thing or two about investing, whenever people, call it family or friends, ask me about investing, especially if they don't know where to start, I always push them towards VTI because this ETF, like it says, offers exposure to pretty much everything. The second largest ETF with 1.41 trillion in assets under management is ticker symbol VOO, or the VOO, the Vanguard S&P 500 ETF. I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard about it. This ETF offers exposure to, well, the S&P 500. Now, the S&P 500 has been a group of single stocks that is really hard to outperform, especially when they're grouped together. And because VOO is so cheap to hold on to with an expense ratio of 0.03%, this ETF offers you one-click exposure to the S&P 500 for very cheap. And again, the S&P 500 is very hard to outperform. Now, this is another great ETF because it offers a ton of diversification, it's cheap to hold on to, and I mean, who doesn't want more exposure to the S&P 500? The next largest ETF with 629 billion in AUM is SPY, or the Spider S&P 500 ETF Trust. Now, this is, of course, just another S&P 500 ETF. You can buy into whatever S&P 500 ETF that you really want. This one's expense ratio is 0.09%. Again, a great ETF if you do want exposure to names in technology, financials, and healthcare, which make up around 50% of the portfolio. The next largest ETF on the list is ticker symbol IVV, or the iShares Core S&P 500 ETF. This ETF has around 586 billion AUM. So yet again, another S&P 500 ETF. I think we can see a pattern here. The S&P 500 ETFs are very popular. And this is once again because they are very hard to outperform. You can, of course, build your own portfolio, buy single stocks, and do whatever you want. And I'm not saying that it's impossible to outperform the S&P 500. I'm just saying that many have tried and many have failed. The next biggest ETF with 318 billion AUM is QQQ, or the Invesco Q Trust ETF. Now, this ETF is obviously very technology focused with names like Apple, Nvidia, Microsoft, Amazon, Broadcom, etc. This ETF has actually outperformed the S&P 500 ETFs over multiple different time frames, and that's just because it's so tech heavy. Now, if you're an investor with a pretty high risk tolerance and you want exposure to a little bit higher beta names, this ETF is definitely going to give you that. And again, this ETF can be a great one-size-fits-all for that investor that wants a massive amount of exposure to technology. The next biggest ETF is ticker symbol VUG, or the Vanguard Growth Index Fund ETF. Now, this one has 292 billion AUM, and again, it's full of different growth names that, at least over the last few years, have done very well. Altogether, around 183 names in this ETF. Again, a lot of crossover with lots of the other ETFs we've been talking about. And to be completely honest, there's a ton of overlap in all 10 of the largest ETFs in the world. So honestly, that probably tells us something. The next biggest one is ticker symbol VTV, or the Vanguard Value Index Fund ETF. This ETF, as you guessed, are full of different value names, high quality dividend paying names that over time have grown consistently but also paid more and more in dividends and offers a nice starting yield. This ETF is around 192 billion AUM, so it still does come in as one of the largest ETFs in the world. And honestly, just like the others, tons of overlap with some of the other names, but still a great ETF to look into. Next, we have ticker symbol VO, or the Vanguard Mid Cap Index Fund, and this ETF is going to give you exposure to, you guessed it, mid cap stocks. Now, there's around 321 different stocks in this ETF. Some of the names are familiar, although a lot of these names aren't as familiar as some of the other ones we talked about so far in this video. But all in all, an ETF that is 184 billion AUM and has grown nice and consistently over the years. Next, we have ticker symbol VWO, or the Vanguard FTSE Emerging Markets Index Fund ETF. This one has 109 billion, and compared to the other ones, this ETF has traded more or less sideways over the max time frame. Number 10 of the largest ETFs in the world is ticker symbol VIG, or the Vanguard Dividend Appreciation Index Fund ETF. This one has 105 billion AUM, and this ETF offers a nice mix of growth exposure and dividend growth on top of that. This ETF is one of my personal favorites, definitely worth looking into. So there we have it, guys. Those are 10 of the largest ETFs in the world. VTI once again coming in at $1.8 trillion. VU coming in at $1.41 trillion. So just between those two ETFs alone, $3 trillion. Now again, just because an ETF is maybe the largest or maybe the smallest, doesn't mean that it's necessarily better or worse than any other ETF, but it does just go to show that a massive amount of money is being stuffed into a relatively small amount of ETFs, and on top of that, within these ETFs, a lot of S&P 500 exposure, and even beyond that, if you look at the top holdings, a lot of the similar names are being seen throughout all these. Now, I personally love ETF investing because it gives you instant exposure to tons of different stocks, and it really does feel like there's an ETF out there for every single investor, whether you want to focus your portfolio on more growth or let's say dividends, or maybe a little mix of both of them. There really is a product out there for every single investor these days. So now that we went through the 10 largest ETFs, I do have one final question for you guys down below. Out of all the ETFs in the market, what's your go-to? What's your number one favorite ETF? If I would ask you to pick one, let me know in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to please drop a like in it and subscribe for more future content like this. Thanks as always for stopping by, and if you are interested in investing, make sure to check out these recent videos I posted right here.